Okay, we'll call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology and the new Moog synthesizer that we've lined up here.
It's called surround sound.
It is. Perhaps our audio engineers can get rid of the echo effect. Good morning. I want to thank all of our witnesses today for clearing their schedules to come before our Subcommittee on Communications and Technology to discuss the Obama administration's proposal to transfer to another entity oversight of the domain name system. I read all of your testimony. I appreciate your counsel, and I especially appreciate the thoughtful scenarios and stress tests noted in Mr. Del Bianco's testimony. Those are precisely the kinds of issues that certainly get our attention. I cannot overstate the importance of freedom of the internet from government control, nor can I overstate the threat from foreign governments who seek to control, tax, censor, and otherwise impose their own agendas on the internet. That's why the House has unanimously passed both a resolution and legislation that affirm our policy that the United States should promote a global internet free from government control. And I do hope the United States Senate will take up our latest measure with all due haste. Obviously, the administration's proposal has sparked furious debate and brought together in opposition some interesting former combatants ranging from Karl Rove to Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. I called today's hearing to get answers to exactly what the Obama administration is proposing and what it is not. Are the goals of security, stability, resilience, and freedom of the internet compatible with a multi-stakeholder managed domain name system? The multi-stakeholder model is a key part of the success of the internet, with engineers, academics, public interest groups, and users collaborating in a bottom-up, not government-down approach. The decentralized management structure provides the flexibility to evolve and disperses the risks posed by bad actors. However, once NTIA gives up its current role, who will fill the void? What assurance do internet users have that such a change will not lead to foreign government mischief? If things do go astray, is there a path back for NTIA? The role that NTIA performs, though somewhat ministerial, has served as an important backstop. While I am heartened to see the criteria that NTIA set forth for any acceptable proposal included a prohibition on government-led or governmental organization taking control, I do remain concerned about how to prevent such a takeover in the future. What safeguards would be in place? We cannot allow institutions such as the United Nations or the International Telecommunications Union to insert themselves into the functioning of the domain name system now or as part of any successor solution. Make no mistake, threats to the openness and freedom of the internet are real. Some authoritarian leaders, such as Vladimir Putin, have explicitly announced their desire to gain control of the internet. In fact, just a year and a half ago, at the World Conference on International Telecommunications in Dubai, a group of nations attempted to use a treaty on telephone networks and services as a backdoor to impose policies that could have thwarted the robust and open nature of the internet. I'm sure the administration understands why we're so concerned about any proposed changes to how the internet's governed. We need details on how the process will work and the criteria for evaluating the proposals. Mr. Shimkus and Mrs. Blackburn have a bill they recently introduced, H.R. 4342, which I believe has been distributed to everyone here, that would have the GAO study the proposals and present a nonpartisan evaluation. This is a prudent idea and one we will move forward on very soon. Any plan must protect all participants in the internet ecosystem and demonstrate the successor's technical ability to manage the IANA functions. If there are not sufficient safeguards in place to prevent foreign government intrusion, then this concept should go no further. Even with these guarantees, I remain concerned about the opportunities for abuse. When it comes to the core principles that NTIA and the State Department have put forward, I urge them to follow the admonition of Margaret Thatcher and, quote, don't go wobbly, quote. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle once the transition begins. So we're holding this hearing because far too much is at stake for any uncertainty or ambiguity as to our path forward. A little less than a year ago, the world was watching as we deliberated H.R. 1580, our unanimously passed bill supporting the multi-stakeholder process. The world, including those deeply concerned about government control of the internet, is watching again today. This is the administration's opportunity to make its case and answer our questions. Prove to us that you will conduct this proposed process in a way that leaves no room for error and that will protect the free and open Internet we have all come to expect and rely upon. With that, I would yield to the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Latta.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for our witnesses for testifying today. As the chairman said, the Internet has developed into a robust and competitive frontier for free enterprise, innovation, job creation, and economic growth and prosperity. In our own democratic government, it serves as a tool for citizens to exercise their fundamental freedoms, and for those around the world, the Internet enables the exercise of basic human rights as well as political advancement and reform. The preservation of the Internet's openness and freedom is and must continue to be non-negotiable. As the NTIA prepares to relinquish its contractual oversight of IANA and with functions of ICANN, any new oversight proposals that threaten to diminish the existing multi-stakeholder model of Internet governance must be rejected. Not doing so will jeopardize the economic prosperity we have achieved throughout the United States and the world and may curtail the basic freedoms and human rights of millions, if not billions. I support calls to engage in rigorous and careful congressional oversight of NTI's proposed transition of this contract to ensure that no government or intergovernmental body takes control of domain name system responsibilities and that the Internet remains as free and open as it is today. And again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and before I recognize the gentlelady, the ranking member from California, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put a statement of support from the Internet Association. Represents many of America's great Internet successful companies, including Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, Netflix, and Google, and statements from AT&T, Verizon, Cisco, and the United States Chamber of Commerce expressing support for a process to investigate a transition that precludes other governments from assuming the role the U.S. currently plays. I have all of those, and without objection, they'll be entered into the record. And with that, I'll now turn to my friend and colleague from California, Ms. Eshoo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, both for having this hearing and for our important witnesses that are here today. This is a very important discussion that we're going to have, and we look forward to your testimony. For more than 2 decades, there's no question that the Internet has flourished as a platform that enables the exchange of commerce, trade, and information. Last year, the House passed legislation on a 413-0 vote, stating, quote, "It is the policy of the United States to preserve and advance the successful multi-stakeholder model that governs the Internet," end of quote. Now we're hearing the criticisms and even rejection of this model, which has provided the underpinnings for innovation, openness, and economic prosperity around the world. I think history can be instructive to us here. In 1998, the U.S. Department of Commerce outlined a plan that would phase out its policy oversight role within 2 years. While this transition obviously took longer than it should, they operated more on government time than on real time, it's now time for the United States to finally walk the walk and demonstrate to the world that while the Internet was a product of America's genius, no government or intergovernmental organization should control its future. To ensure that the next 2 decades, and even beyond that, are just as successful, we need to think big about how we preserve the global Internet principles of openness, security, stability, and resiliency. In this context, NTIA's announcement last month to transition key Internet domain name functions to the global multi-stakeholder community is an important step in the evolution of the Internet. It's what people voted for, 413-0. That's what was embedded in that resolution. And that resolution was more than noticed by countries around the world because the United States of America was absolutely 1,000% united. The executive branch, the Senate, the House, all our representatives. There was no daylight between us. So I think it might be instructive to go back and see what members voted for. During the 2012 World Conference on International Telecommunications, the WICIT, in Dubai, we saw firsthand that there are nations around the globe who do not share our vision for maintaining the free flow of information across the Internet. In practice, this has manifested itself in the blocking of popular social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, which are used daily by millions around the world to share their ideas, their news, and their beliefs. I just headed up a resolution condemning Turkey for what it did in shutting all of these platforms down. And so I don't think that there's an argument about that. I think there's some confusion about the understanding of what this represents. Independent of whether NTIA successfully transitions the domain name system, the DNS, to the multi-stakeholder community, these acts of censorship will continue unless we unite across the globe in support of a free and open Internet. I think that that's what we have to keep front and center here. So, Mr. Chairman, I think we have significant work ahead of us. I hope this is the first of many conversations we have to not only examine ICANN's role, but more broadly, how to expand the availability of broadband, enhance consumer privacy, ensure the security of communication networks, and protect intellectual property around the world. My thanks again to the witnesses, and I want to especially recognize Assistant Secretary Strickling for his leadership and vision to ensure that that throughout this transition, the Internet remains open to all, in capital letters, to all, and that it remain a success story for generations to come. I would like to, I don't know where the time clock is on this.
14 seconds.
14 seconds? Do you want to take 14 seconds, Doris, or we'll have, okay. Well, then I'll yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. Chair recognizes the big chair, Mr. Upton from Michigan. Please go ahead.
Thank you, my friend. Today, our important work continues to protect the future of the Internet, a subject of great consequence for sure. This committee has been at the forefront of the effort to preserve the Internet openness and freedom. A non-regulatory, multi-stakeholder governance model is essential to the continued success of the Internet and has been critical to the development of this engine of economic, political, and social engagement. We have affirmed our commitment to this principle more than once, first with the passage of a Sense of Congress Resolution 2012, and then, of course, with H.R. 1580, which all of us have talked about, which passed by a unanimous vote. We must do all that we can to keep the Internet free from the control of those who wish to use it for less than noble means. Keeping it out of the hands of China, Iran, and Russia, who have demonstrated hostility towards the free market, the flowing, unfettered exchange of information is important. NTIA's recent announcement of its intent to transition Internet oversight functions to a new structure should be met with a critical eye, especially when you take into account the administration's track record of saying one thing and doing yet another. This issue has united one-time opponents Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, who are fighting to protect the Internet as we know it. Something as important as the future of the Internet demands a thoughtful and deliberative process, and I join my colleagues in supporting the .com Act, and I would commend Mr. Shimkus and Ms. Blackburn for co-authoring that measure, as well as Mr. Latta, Elmers, and Barton for their early support, and we plan to announce a markup schedule very soon. This act will step on the brakes until the GAO is able to analyze all the aspects and implications of the proposed shift in Internet oversight, including potential national security concerns. And while I do not oppose a vigorous discussion of whether and how we could transition the domain name system out of the Commerce Department's purview, we are a long way from seeing a proposal that I could support. As the world moves forward with this discussion, we'll conduct vigorous oversight of the process and hold NTIA to its word that it will not allow the Internet to fall victim to international government power grabs. Our work continues. I yield the 1 minute each to Mr. Shimkus and Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start with a clip of President Clinton and the founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales, as part of my opening statement.
a lot of people who've been trying to take this authority away from the United States wanted to do it for the sole purpose of cracking down on internet freedom and limiting it and having governments protect their backsides instead of empower their people. So are you at all worried, Jimmy, that that if we give up this domain jurisdiction that we've had for all these years, that we'll lose internet freedom?
Yeah, I'm very worried about it. I'm on a high-level panel at ICANN discussing these issues, and one of the things that really concerns me is some of the other people on the panel, when they talk about, well, it's important that we have respect for local cultures. Okay, I respect local cultures, but I'm not sure if that means, I think you, the head of the telecom regulation unit in a particular country, should be banning parts of Wikipedia. That's not local cultural variation that we should embrace and accept. That's a human rights violation.
Mr. Chairman, I echo their concerns. As you know, I dropped the .com Act with Marcia last week. The main critics of my bill seem to be saying that Congress being informed about the proposals presented to NTIA and the process of how this transition would occur would somehow embolden our enemies. I find it hard to believe that the most transparent administration in the history of the universe would not want the Congress to be informed on how this process would work. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses, and hopefully we'll get some clarity on how an open and transparent NTIA transfer process is beneficial to a free and open internet. And I yield to Marcia.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for his work on the .com Act. Mr. Chairman, I have to tell you, I thought when you were quoting Margaret Thatcher, and I'm sure Ms. Eshu and Ms. Matsui joined me in this, I thought you were going to say, since we're talking communications, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman, which was also one of Thatcher's very famous quotes. We all know that the internet has had a revolutionary impact. Part of this is due to its bottom-up governance and its open ecosystem. And like many of my colleagues, I support a free market multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. In a perfect world, ICANN and IANA would be fully privatized and free from any government influence or control. However, realistically, we know that China, Russia, maybe other bad actors have a different viewpoint. Their end goal is to have ICANN and IANA functions migrate to the UN's ITU. That solution is one that I will never stand for or allow to occur. If the Commerce Department is going to relinquish control of its contractual authority over the IANA contract and move control of DNS into a global multi-stakeholder community, the timing and architecture must be perfect. If this administration wants to prove to Congress and the international community that they are serious about this process, they must immediately begin to end net neutrality proceedings. Telling Congress and the international community that they are serious about relinquishing control while working to promote net neutrality is disingenuous. I thank the chairman. I'll yield back my time.
Thank Genelie's comments. Now turn to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, for holding this timely hearing on the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's recent announcement to begin the process of transitioning key Internet domain name functions to the global multi-stakeholder community. I want to welcome back Assistant Secretary Larry Strickling and Ambassador David Gross. Your past testimony has greatly enhanced the committee's deliberations on issues related to Internet governance, and I want to thank Mr. Jahadi for traveling halfway around the world to take the time to testify before our subcommittee. This distinguished panel of witnesses highlights just how important this upcoming transition will be. This is a critical opportunity to reaffirm the United States' commitment to a multi-stakeholder approach to Internet governance and policymaking. Since the late 1990s, the U.S. government, under both Democratic and Republican administrations, has consistently embraced the vision that a global Internet should be governed through a decentralized, bottom-up approach with no single government or intergovernmental entity exercising control over its decision-making process. That commitment remains true today. The United States continues to stand up for the multi-stakeholder model time and again in international forums while pushing back against countries that have sought an expansion of governmental control. Congress has also spoken unanimously in support of this multi-stakeholder vision, first through a bipartisan, bicameral resolution last Congress, then through legislation that passed the House last year that would make it the official policy of the United States to, quote, preserve and advance the successful multi-stakeholder model that governs the Internet, end quote. I agree it's now time for the U.S. government to take additional steps to fulfill this vision. For over 15 years, NTIA has played a limited procedural role in the administration of the domain name system. This responsibility, while ministerial, is associated with the perception that the United States serves as a steward of the Internet. I share NTIA's belief that this temporary stewardship should come to an end in the near future. The multi-stakeholder system has matured and gained legitimacy over the past decade. I am confident that the non-governmental Internet community will act as capable, responsible stewards of the Internet and fill the role left by NTIA. But the upcoming transition in no way suggests that the United States plans to relinquish control of the Internet to authoritarian states. President Clinton. To the contrary, our efforts should be seen as a vote of confidence that the successful bottom-up decentralized model will continue to preserve and protect the Internet as a free and open platform for commerce, innovation, and self-expression. NTIA has outlined key principles to guide the transition process, including a commitment not to accept any proposal that replaces the NTIA role with a government-led or intergovernmental organization like the ITU. Going forward, I hope the NTIA and ICANN will institute an open, transparent process for the consideration of transition proposals submitted by stakeholders. A period of notice and comment should be provided so that the decision makers have a comprehensive record to consider the merits of the proposals. This committee should monitor NTIA's and ICANN's effort closely, but we must resist the calls for reactionary legislation that would needlessly tie the hands of the agency. Not only are these efforts inconsistent with Congress's longstanding and bipartisan support for the multi-stakeholder model, they also send a dangerous signal to the rest of the world that we lack faith in the existing multi-stakeholder system. That's why I hope we'll work closely with our witnesses today throughout this transition process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. I think that covers all the opening statements we're allowed to do. So with this, we'll go to our distinguished panel. And we'll start with Mr. Larry Strickling, the Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information Administration, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. That has to be one of the longer titles in the communication world. Larry, thank you for being with us. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eshoo and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here to testify about NTIA's role working with ICANN and the domain name system, as well as our March 14th release announcing our intent to transition key Internet domain name functions to the global multi-stakeholder community. I'm pleased to be joined today by Fadi Shahadi, the CEO of ICANN, and Ambassador David Gross, who was involved in these issues when he served as the State Department Coordinator for International Communications and Information Policy during the Bush administration. For 16 years, it has been the clear and unquestioned policy of the United States government that the private sector should lead the management of the domain name system. In its 1998 policy statement, the Department of Commerce stated that the U.S. government is committed to a transition that will allow the private sector to take leadership for DNS management. Since then, the Department, through NTIA, has entered into a series of agreements with ICANN under which it performs what are known as the IANA functions. These include assigning Internet protocol numbers to regional registries, who then assign them to Internet service providers. Another function is the maintenance and updating of the root zone file of top-level domain names, the so-called address book for the Internet that is necessary for the routing of Internet communications. ICANN performs these tasks at no cost to the U.S. government. Our role in this process is simply to verify changes and updates proposed by ICANN to the root zone file before passing these changes on to VeriSign, which actually maintains and updates the root zone file. ICANN, along with other Internet technical organizations such as the Internet Engineering Task Force, develop their policies through bottom-up multi-stakeholder processes. These efforts are open to all stakeholders, whether they are businesses, civil society organizations, technical experts, or governments who work in concert to reach consensus agreements on Internet policies. And I want to emphasize, because I heard a number of references to U.S. control of policymaking at ICANN, and that is not the case. We do not exercise any control or oversight over policymaking. That is performed today by the global multi-stakeholder community working at ICANN or at the IETF. Now, the U.S. government has been a vigorous supporter of the multi-stakeholder model of Internet governance from the start. However, we're not the only ones. As Congresswoman Eshoo pointed out, in 2012, both houses of Congress unanimously passed resolutions stating that it was the consistent and unequivocal policy of the United States to promote a global Internet free from government control and preserve and advance the successful multi-stakeholder model that governs the Internet today. In furtherance of this clear congressional statement, on March 14th, NTIA announced the final phase of the privatization of the domain name system by asking ICANN to convene global stakeholders to develop a proposal to transition the current role played by NTIA in the coordination of the domain name system. In making this announcement, we stated that the transition proposal must have broad community support and must address 4 principles. It must support and enhance the multi-stakeholder model. It must maintain the security, stability, and resiliency of the Internet domain name system. It must meet the needs and expectations of the global customers and partners of the IANA services, and it must maintain the openness of the Internet. And we also made crystal clear that we will not accept a proposal that replaces the NTIA role with a government-led or intergovernmental solution. We asked ICANN, as the current IANA functions contractor, to convene the multi-stakeholder process to develop the transition plan. We informed ICANN that we expected it to work collaboratively with the other Internet technical organizations, including the Internet Society, the IETF, the Internet Architecture Board, and the regional Internet registries. Last week at its meeting in Singapore, ICANN, working with these organizations, convened 2 public sessions to obtain stakeholder input on how to design the process to develop the transition plan, collecting several hours of public comment, which will help craft a proposal for the process going forward. Stakeholders have responded to our announcement with strong statements of support. Among the business community, Microsoft hailed the announcement as a significant and welcome development. Cisco stated that it has long supported an open and innovative multi-stakeholder Internet governance process in this next step in its evolution. From civil society, just yesterday, a group of Internet freedom and human rights organizations, including Freedom House, Public Knowledge, Human Rights Watch, and the New America Foundation, welcomed NTIA's announcement stating that it would facilitate the exercise of human rights online. Our announcement in the process that is now underway to develop a transition plan benefits American interests. We depend on a growing and innovative Internet, and despite the symbolic role the U.S. government has played over the years, the fact is that no country controls the Internet. Its continued growth and innovation depends on building trust among all users worldwide and strengthening the engagement of all stakeholders. Taking this action is the best measure to prevent authoritarian regimes from expanding their restrictive policies beyond their own borders. I am confident that the global Internet community will work diligently to develop a plan that has the support of the community and meets the 4 conditions. I want to assure all members that before any transition takes place, The businesses, civil society organizations, and technical experts of the Internet must present a plan that ensures the uninterrupted, stable functioning of the Internet and preserves its openness. Until such time, there will be no change in our current role. I also want to assure all members that even as the United States looks to transition out of this clerical role we play, we will remain strong and vigorous advocates for Internet freedom, growth, and innovation. We will continue to play a major role on ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee, where governments develop consensus advice to ICANN on public policy matters. And we will continue in our role to enhance the accountability and transparency of ICANN through our participation in the accountability and transparency review teams established by the affirmation of commitments we signed with ICANN in 2009. I pledge to keep this subcommittee informed of the progress of the community's efforts to develop the transition plan, and to that end, I look forward to answering your questions this morning. Thank you.
Mr. Strickling, thank you very much for your testimony and for always working closely with this subcommittee. We do appreciate that. Now, next up is the President and CEO of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, Mr. Fadi Shahadi. Mr. Shahadi, thank you very much for arranging your schedule to be here before this subcommittee. I think you can tell there's a lot of interest in what is being proposed. So the microphone is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee. It is truly a pleasure for me to be standing before you today to testify. I was 18 when I came to this country alone, escaping an oppressive regime. And I came with one thing in my hand because I had no money and I didn't speak English. I came with the belief in this open system, in this system that includes everyone, in a system that is truly bottom-up. My first boss at AT&T, I, of course, was addressing him as Mr. Green, and he kept saying, "No, just call me Bob." I wrote a long letter to my parents about this. This only happens here. And it's these same values of openness, of inclusivity, of belief in the bottom-up, that it's from there that the best ideas come. It's that belief that makes me stand in front of you today. I'm here because of that. And it is these same values that underpin the multi-stakeholder model: openness, inclusivity, bottom-up participation. It is a phenomenal invention of America. It is even as phenomenal as the internet itself, that we bring everyone together to the table to decide how we govern things together. It is remarkable, and it's also worked very well. That's what we should remember. We have now a $4 trillion digital economy in the G20 countries. This is all because of people, some of them in this room that I want to recognize, my own chairman, Dr. Crocker, who as kids in Van Nuys High School decided to give it to the world, to build something that was distributed, powerful, and enabled everyone to participate equally. We govern the internet in the same way it works, and that should not change. That inclusivity and that openness guarantees that no one captures the system. In the same way the internet is architected, and I'm an engineer, I can tell you that the architecture works this way and the governance should work this way. No one should capture it. And I agree with President Clinton that people will try to capture it, but they haven't. For 15 years, ICANN has operated without one government or any government capturing the decision-making. Private sector, users, civil society, engineers, academia, all sit together and participate in a process of governing the internet. It's worked remarkably well. Let's keep it this way. And I want today to thank you personally, because I was at the wicket when this body's resolution came to us as a strong lightning rod, showing America's commitment to the multi-stakeholder model. We trusted it then. We should continue trusting it. It works. And we thank you for that. We thank you for that support. The world thanked you for that support, and I do too. NTIA's announcement on March 14th is truly the culmination of 15 years of progressive efforts by this administration, by prior administrations, to hand the stewardship of the internet to the people who built it. We're not going to squander this responsibility. This is an important one. We, along with so many companies, welcome that announcement. I think Assistant Secretary Strickling mentioned the many companies that have come out publicly, the many organizations from all walks of life, businesses, civil society, supporting that announcement. They have looked at it, and they have supported it, and we support it as well. This announcement shows the world America's values again. Who else would do that? What nation would have the vision, the magnanimity, the consistency to do what we're doing here? We're handing the world back what we promised them we would. Bottom-up, multi-stakeholder management of this great human resource, this great economic resource. I stand in front of you today with a firm commitment that we will run an open, transparent process. We will keep it calm and wise. We have no rush. There is absolutely no rush. It's more important to get it right than to rush it. That's my commitment to you. We started the process in Singapore, thousands of people there. And at the heart of this proposal is the commitment for security, stability of the internet. That is our number one job. We will not relent on that. We haven't for 15 years. We're not about to start that. That's our commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your testimony. Now, for our final witness on this panel, we have Ambassador David Gross, partner in Wiley Ryan. Ambassador Gross, good to have you back before our subcommittee. Thanks for your counsel. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the subcommittee. It's a great pleasure to be back before you again today. Mr. Chairman, if I may ask, I have a written testimony that I would like to have made a part of the record, if that's
Without
permitted.
objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm testifying today on behalf of the Internet Governance Coalition, which is a group of global companies and stakeholders that, as all of us are important players and stakeholders in the future of the Internet. Our primary focus, as you'll see in our prepared testimony and my statement today, is our firm belief that a thriving Internet depends upon a governance structure that is open, transparent, and representative of all stakeholders. I just returned yesterday from Dubai, where I was a member of the U.S. delegation to the ITU's World Telecommunications and Development Conference, part of the ITU's every four-year conference. I come in with a message that you will find similar to the messages that I have brought before you in the past, which is that the world is watching. The world is watching what NTIA announced back on March 14th. The world is watching the U.S. reaction to that announcement, and the world is watching what here Congress does. It is important that the world understand the bipartisan and unanimous and uniform views of the American people as expressed by this Congress. As you know, your role at the World Summit of the Information Society back in 2003 and most importantly in 2005, the role you played in the run-up to the Wicket just in 2012 was decisionally significant. The world watches carefully, and the world understands when America acts in a united fashion. We believe very strongly that the process that was begun by NTIA back on March 14th is a good and important process. As has been discussed by all of you, as well as my co-panelists, that process is the beginning of a process. It is not an answer. The answer will come from the Internet community as requested by NTIA. It seems to me, based on my experience, that no one can predict what the specifics of that will be today. But I take great comfort, we take great comfort, in the four principles that were announced by Assistant Secretary Strickling, and importantly, as has been noted repeatedly, that NTIA, on behalf of the U.S. government, will not accept a proposal that replaces NTIA's role with a government-led or intergovernmental organization solution. I had a boss when I was in the private sector who used to say and remind all of us of a very important saying: promises made, promises kept. That's what is expected of all of us. That's what we'll be working hard to ensure, that the promises made by NTIA are promises kept by all of us, to ensure that that standard, that test, that high bar that was established in the March 14th statement is one that is met by all. And, as my co-panelists have indicated, if for some reason, to our great surprise, it cannot be met, we should start over. It should not be rushed. It needs to meet that high test. We are all in agreement on that. The key going forward is to ensure the extraordinary benefits of the Internet, not only for the American people, but for people around the world. It is truly one of the great historic achievements of our generation. It is something to be maintained. It is something to be encouraged. And our view is that the process that has been begun is designed to do that. The time will come in the future to discuss in detail what substantive proposals are brought forward and their nature and whether or not they are in the public interest or not. But at this stage, we are very comfortable, very, very comfortable, that the process that has begun is an important one. It is a real one. It is one that all of us who are optimistic believe it will result in a better Internet governance situation, and one that would include the fact that promises made by the American people back at the beginning in 1998 are promises kept by all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thanks to all of our witnesses on this first panel. I appreciate your counsel and your testimony. So, Mr. Strickling, thank you again for being here. Thanks for briefing us ahead of time before the announcement. How will NTIA ultimately decide whether a proposed transition plan for IANA developed by global stakeholders is acceptable, and what factors will you use to determine if such a proposal supports and enhances the multi-stakeholder process, maintains security, stability, resilience in the Internet domain name system, and meets the needs and expectations of global customers and partners of the IANA services and maintains the openness? So describe for us, what is that process, and once what authority do you have to hand this off and sort of back away?
Well, you've asked a number of questions there. Let me take up the last one initially, which is that our role in this historically derives from the decision made in the late 1990s to privatize this. And at that time, NTIA was directed to find an organization to perform those roles. So we don't do this under any statutory mandate to perform this role. It was done as part of the efforts of the government back in the late 1990s to privatize. So
but you do have a contract with
yes,
ICANN
yes.
that is renewable for two two-year additions, right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. So the last contract that we did with them in 2012 has a expiration date of September 30th, 2015. But we have within that contract the ability to extend it for up to two-year terms beyond that. So as Ambassador Gross said, we have plenty of time to work through these issues. We have certainly teed up the September 2015 as a date that the community might want to use as a target. That's 18 months. Should give the community ample time to work on this, but there's no cliff if when we reach that time we don't have a proposal presented to us.
But if you have that proposal presented to you, and I want you to get to what the criteria would be you would go through, and I think you've highlighted some of that in your statement. But is it in effect saying, I'm done with the contract with ICANN?
Yes, I think if we get to a point, and when we get to the point where there has been an appropriate transition plan presented that satisfies all the criteria, the idea would be that whatever is in that plan would then be put into effect, and we would then be able to just allow our contract with ICANN to expire.
And then is there ever any getting that contractual relationship back to NTIA, or is that it for the U.S. in terms of any contractual role with ICANN? Are they on their own then?
It depends, I think, on what comes back to us in the transition plan, but we do not envision that we would then come back and ever contract for the IANA functions at any point in the future. Again, the whole point of this in the late 90s was to identify someone who could take this over and manage it. Again, it's,
And I
at that
understand
point in
that.
time, it was viewed that this transition would have been complete by the year 2000, as Congresswoman Eshoo pointed out. So some might ask what's taken us so long.
Sure.
But,
Now, in Mr. Del Bianco's stress test scenarios, in his testimony, I assume you've had a chance to read through those.
I have.
He raises some questions that I think are valid to raise. What happens if ICANN decides to reconstitute itself overseas rather than California, out from under the laws? What happens if they go their separate way and start doing things that Mr. Shahade would never agree to, but he might be gone someday?
So we have a separate document that we've signed with ICANN called the Affirmation of Commitment.
Right.
And I think we've been up here and have testified on that in the past. We have not in any way implicated that agreement in any of what we're proposing now. It is under that document that ICANN has committed to keep its headquarters in the state of California, or within the United
But
States.
that can be canceled by either party, correct?
Yes, there is a
With a
provision under which it could
120-day
be
notice.
canceled. And you can certainly inquire of the CEO his intentions with that in regard to that. Our understanding is that they're quite comfortable maintaining a California office and intend to do so for the foreseeable future, but he can answer.
Yeah,
that
and I'm looking like
authoritatively.
beyond all of us. You know, what happens 20 years from now?
But let me come back to the
Sure.
point you started with, which were that the questions that are raised by Mr. Del Bianco, we think are important ones. And they really deal, I think, with the symbolic nature of our relationship with the ICANN. I think reflected in many of the comments we heard this morning, that people, I think, assume we have much more control over this than in fact we do. And it's largely symbolic. And I do think it's important as we work through this transition to focus not just on the technical issue of who's going to check the accuracy of root zone file updates, but to also look at the question of how does ICANN continue to perform in an accountable and transparent way, the belief being that we always were there in effect to backstop that in some
Right.
fashion. I think that's a very important set of questions that need to be answered in this process. We intend to participate vigorously in that because we and other American business and civil society interests have a stake in that as
All right.
well, and that's part of the process.
And I've overshot my time. Thank you very much. And now turn to the gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go to my colleagues, and I can go last. So I don't know who is here first. Mr. Doyle? We're both here together. Okay. Well, whomever, Mr. Doyle, and then...
Are you
and then when
passing to
we
them or
rotate-
yielding?
Yeah, no, I'll yield my time.
You're passing. You're
Yeah,
yielding
I'll
or
pass. Whatever is the best. How's that?
I would
All right?
assume you want to just defer to Mr. Doyle and not give up your time.
Yeah, I'll...
We need
last.
ICANN to
I'll
arbitrate
question
this.
last. How's that?
That's fine.
Clear
Then
as
the chair would
day.
now recognize Mr. Doyle for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and, wow, we getting that same. Thank you for your testimony today. I think just your testimony has gone a long way in clearing up, I think, some of the misconceptions that have come from this announcement. Mr. Strickling, when you talk about stakeholders, tell us, who are the stakeholders? I mean, give us some of the names of the people in this multi-stakeholder process we're talking about. Who are we really talking about?
So at the broadest level, it's anyone interested in these issues. And in fact, that's large American companies as well as small and medium-sized.
Like AT&T, Verizon,
Yes.
Comcast,
Yes,
Google,
all of those.
Facebook, Yahoo.
Yes.
Right, this is what this is what we're talking about.
Right.
And who else is in this stakeholder process?
The civil society organizations who are so focused on internet freedom and free flow of information are part of this process. Again, you'll hear from a representative of them in the second panel, and they've issued statements of support in that regard. Technical experts have been at the core of this from the beginning, folks like Vince Cerf, Bob Kahn, Steve Crocker, who's in the
Right.
audience
So,
today.
so
were
what we're
people who
talking
designed
about
this.
really is an evolution of transitioning this to the private sector. right? I mean, this is like I don't believe NTIA controls ICANN. I think that's pretty clear that you have a ministerial role. You don't control the process. But I would think my colleagues over here would love the notion that the government's transferring something over to the private sector.
Would the gentleman yield just for
Sure, I'll yield,
clarification?
Chairman.
Because I think also part of ICANN, there is a government influence as well, right, on your board?
Yes, there's
But
a
nobody controls ICANN.
Right.
So
we don't.
to the point.
It's not
yeah.
like we're giving up control of something. We don't control it. So that's the point I wanted to make. And the stakeholders we're talking about are private companies and civil society, right? I mean, I just think that needs to be said publicly, because you use that word stakeholders, and a lot of people don't seem to understand what we're talking about. Let me ask you something else, Mr. Strickland. When you were proceeding with this announcement, did you consult with other branches of the federal government, like the State Department, the Department of Defense, intelligence agencies, and other agencies with a stake in U.S. national security and foreign policy?
Yes.
And when you did that, did any of these branches of government object to your announcement on the basis that it would have a negative impact on U.S. foreign policy or national security?
No.
So, Ambassador Gross, let me ask you, after the United States transitions the IANA contract, what will be the means for our government to participate in the multi-stakeholder process?
Well, I think there are two pieces in answer to that important question. One is, as has been indicated, the U.S. government has participated in the GAC, which is the Government Advisory Committee, which is a committee of ICANN. And based on the testimony and, of course, our understanding, that will continue as it has in the past. The second part, though, I think is yet to be determined. That is, the question is on the IANA functions themselves and the relationship between the U.S. government and those functions. It has been asked by NTIA of the Internet community, asking ICANN to be the convener for the specifics of what a proposal would look like. I think it's premature for any of us to know the true answer to your important question until we see what that proposal actually looks like.
And just one last question. How can Internet governance bodies like ICANN and IGF and others preserve a free and open expression on the Internet and push back against some of these governments that are restricting speech online by blocking citizens' access to services like Wikipedia and YouTube and Twitters and others? What can we do to push back against that?
Well, first and foremost, we need to ensure that ICANN continues, as it has in the past, to be committed, as Mr. Shahade has indicated today, its commitment to making sure that the Internet continues to be open.
On that question.
NTIA importantly said that that is one of the primary criteria that it will be looking at as it evaluates whatever proposal comes forward from the Internet community. And also, if I may also suggest that the United States government writ large, all branches of the government, need to continue to do what they have been doing for years now, which is to speak loudly, speak clearly, and speak to this issue on an ongoing basis, both with friends and with foes. It is important to be consistent. I am pleased at how consistent the U.S. government has been. It should continue to be so.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time is almost over. And maybe, Mr. Strickland, do you want to react to that question, too, in the last 10 seconds?
I think the ultimate end of this has to be to continue to build and support stakeholders throughout the world, because what the strongest push against these kinds of restrictive policies in these countries is to have a citizenry and a community in those countries that push back from within. And ultimately, that's what it's going to take to end these policies.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. We now turn to the Vice Chair of the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, I think, is actually next. Mr. Latta for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, thanks very much to our witnesses for being here today. It's very, very important to the folks in this room and across the country. Mr. Strickland, if I could just ask you a couple of questions right off the bat. You know, Ohio is very fortunate to have the Cleveland Clinic in our state, and it's you know, it's not only nationally known but worldwide renowned for what it does. And Cleveland Clinic's applied to operate a .med top-level domain. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Okay. For the record, Cleveland Clinic's application was rejected and has since been filed a request for reconsideration.
That's correct.
Okay, and we're concerned, across the state about the transparency and the predictability of ICANN's current process regarding the request for reconsideration and how this transition of NTIA's oversight responsibilities might further impede the process. Are there any assurances that NTIA can provide that the transition of ICANN's IANA functions will not negatively impact the status of the current applicants' filings being reviewed by ICANN?
Right, it will have no impact on that.
So you can, right now, so the folks that have got applications out there, you can say there's no impact at all then? Is that correct then?
Not on the basis of this announcement, no.
Okay. And then without the NTI oversight, will NTI ensure that any multi-stakeholder proposal accepts include rigorous transparency and openness standards for ICANN processes going forward?
Absolutely, and not just that, but we expect to see that same level of transparency throughout the process to develop a plan.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Shahadi, if I could, and I hope I said that correctly. Are there current policies in place that ICANN to promote that transparency and openness in its processes? And again, as you've heard from the testimony this morning and also from your attendance at the Wicket, we had hearings last year when we heard about different countries that wanted to go beyond what was supposed to be proposed at that meeting. And so when you're looking at some of the countries looking at trying to use the guise of cybersecurity and things like to really get at the internet for their own really censorship of that internet, what can we really make sure that we can tell our constituents, the people across the country, that as we go forward, that there is going to be that transparency, openness in the process?
I think the commitment of ICANN to transparency is enshrined in our affirmations. We should live by these, and I can assure you that since I've arrived, I've put additional resources and effort to ensure that we adhere to our transparency mechanisms. We continue to keep every process we make open. We make sure it's inclusive, that anyone can participate. We now translate everything we do in all the UN languages plus Portuguese. Ensure that people can participate in all of our meetings remotely, even when they can't be there. Transparency is at the center, at the heart of what we do.
If I just follow up, you said that there'd be additional resources that you'd be committing. What are those additional resources?
So these are people that are engaged in making sure that all of these processes are recorded, are made available openly, that people can participate when they need to, and ensure that no one can say that we did some process quietly, quickly, or without full availability of participation for everyone.
Okay, thank you. And then also, is there more that ICANN can be doing to improve upon those policies, ensure that the applicants for domain names are fully informed and aware of the organization and structure of the ICANN processes?
There's always more we can do, and since we've arrived, this ICANN administration has added systems for managing the stakeholders' relations. We've more than tripled now the size of the team that is supporting applicants. We have made sure that that team is available globally 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. So there's a series of things we've done to actually enhance the service to the applicants and ensure that they're well informed of what we're doing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair now recognizes gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member. I really am very much involved and interested in governance because I think governance is key to everything, whether it's a government, or whether it's a nonprofit organization, a city council, or whatever. And I believe that, in particular, this is a huge undertaking. And I know we've kind of marched through this for 15 years, but I think now, in particular, the internet is at a different place, obviously. And the participants in the internet are huge. It's global. So my sense is that in the governance model, it's unlike many others in the sense that as we move along, there'll be more and more voices or stakeholders to be addressed. So my sense is that I'm glad that you're taking your time, because I think that's really very important, because as more and more information goes forward, I think that you'll have more and more stakeholders. I'm really pleased that the administration, Mr. Strickling, has really committed to support no proposal that really does not support a free and open internet. I think that's really very important as a principle moving forward. And I do recall, since I was in the Clinton administration, how this process moved forward. And I don't think any of us really envisioned quite where it would be today as far as even the users of the internet. However, having said that, it is really huge in a sense of where we are today. And this is not about creating headlines at all. It's real, and it's about ensuring that the internet governance transition moving forward is responsible to Americans and the whole digital economy. And so I want to know something about this in a sense, because, Mr. Strickling, do you think there are any other processes or procedures that should be put in place to ensure ICANN reviews the proposals by stakeholders in an open and transparent way?
We have not asked ICANN to be a reviewer of proposals. We've asked them to convene the process by which the community will develop a proposal to submit to us. We expect that we will get a proposal that has the support of the community and meets the criteria we've laid out for it. So there's no process by which there's some judge over at ICANN who's going to be a decision maker on this. It's what emerges from the community discussions in the form of a community proposal to us.
Okay, well, thank you. And Mr. Chahadi, you were very eloquent in your testimony. It really does indicate to us why this internet and ICANN is so important moving forward. So therefore, Mr. Chahadi, can you commit to we're saying this over and over again, but I think it's really important, an open and transparent process for the deliberation of any transition proposal that will provide an opportunity for notice and comment, not only to organized civil society and well-financed stakeholders, but also now, to the general public, because we have participants that are worldwide here.
Absolutely. If we do not do that, the process should not be accepted by NTIA, in our opinion. In other words, we are expected to do this. We will do it. Without it, this process is not legitimate.
Okay.
And not only are we going to do it within the ICANN community, which is growing and vast now globally, we will reach out to other communities. We will hold public consultations at the IETF. We will hold public consultations with the regional internet registries. We will hold public consultations with the Internet Society globally. We already announced an extensive schedule of listening and bringing to consensus all the communities towards a proposal that will be acceptable to NTIA.
Would this also include other communities like academic communities and, generally speaking, a broader community, which generally isn't part of the so-called internet organizations?
The answer is yes. In fact, we are in discussions right now with the Harvard Berkman Center and the NYU Governance Lab in New York to actually, along with multiple universities around the world, start a process to have the academic community participate in the future of where we head here. So absolutely.
And also, too, I'm wondering whether, think about governance. Are you also consulting with people who deal with governance and what works and what doesn't work? Now, this is a whole new, I think, level of governance, so to speak, because we're dealing with something, in a sense, that touches every sector of society, every sector of business, every sector, and we don't know yet what's going to be happening down the road. So I think it's important to understand what could happen and may not happen. And
yes. The answer is absolutely yes. We have to be using the same innovation that led us to the internet in the process of designing that process. So I met with Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard. We're meeting with Professor Beth Novak at NYU, many academics around the world who understand how to innovate in governance to make them part of the process.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will note for the committee and those present that Mr. Rakita, who worked with us on the .com Act, walked back with me from Budget Committee, where I'm splitting my time today so that he could be a part of our hearing. Mr. Strickling, first to you. Getting ready for the hearing, I went back and looked at some of the Wicket 12 comments. Ambassador Verveer had made a quote, I want to ask you if you agree with this. He says, discussions with figures in various governments around the world, there is a very significant preoccupation with respect to what we are proposing with respect to broadband and especially with respect to net neutrality. The proceeding is one that could be employed by regimes that don't agree with our perspectives about essentially avoiding regulation of the internet and trying to be sure not to do anything to damage its dynamism and its organic development. It could be employed as a pretext. He's talking about net neutrality, or as an excuse for undertaking public policy activities that we would disagree with pretty profoundly, ending quote. You agree with that statement?
I guess I neither agree nor disagree because I don't know the context in which it was stated. I think it's a statement from a few years ago. I can state that it has not been put into the record by governments in the fashion that it sounds like Ambassador Verveer feared at the time.
Well, do you think that the U.S. could set a better example about internet governance and a multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance by stopping the push for net neutrality?
I think the best example the United States can set is to proceed with the proposal that we made on March the 14th.
Yesterday, Michael O'Reilly, who is one of the FCC commissioners, issued this statement. At this pivotal moment for internet freedom, the FCC's net neutrality proceeding could severely contradict and underestimate the U.S. government's international position. So, how can the U.S. government tell the world to accept a multi-stakeholder model while at the same time the FCC is working with the White House's approval to impose greater control of the internet through net neutrality?
Your question?
How can the U.S. government tell the world that they want them to accept a multi-stakeholder process when within our government, the FCC is pushing forward to implement net neutrality rules?
Well, I think we're comparing apples and oranges. When we're talking about international internet governance, we're talking about governments acting collectively in this space.
Sir, I think that a lot of innovators have conflated the two. And I think that that is truly a problem with us, that there has been a conflating. And we are not setting a good example on that. You referenced the affirmation document, point 8 of that, which would mean that the governance for the internet, for ICANN, would stay domiciled in the United States. Do you expect that to hold?
I do, but you have the CEO right next to me. You might ask him directly.
And I plan to ask him. I am going to go directly to him with that question. So, Mr. Shahade, to you, would you expect that to hold?
I do. It's worked very well for us. It's worked very well for the world. So I think before any change, we should be conscious of that. Pardon?
What would keep it from changing?
To keep the model that is working to the world working well by supporting the model that works. The more we try to exert one government's influence on the model, the more people will want to move it elsewhere. The more we show them that we support the multi-stakeholder model, the more they'll say, this works.
Well then, and I want to say I appreciate the conversation that I've had with you, and I know that you have a difficult task in front of you because there is such a low level of trust with this administration. And I would just ask you, sir, when we look at a multi-stakeholder model that is free from government control, what kind of message is this administration sending if the FCC continues to push forward with regulation of the internet and net neutrality standards?
Again, from my perspective, the best example I can continue giving the world is that the U.S. government is united behind the multi-stakeholder model that enabled the internet and ICANN. and I will continue seeking your support for that.
Would your job be easier if the FCC stopped being an activist agency and trying to force net neutrality?
I'm making my job easier by clarifying to people that what ICANN does has nothing to do with content. We are just managing names and numbers, and we will do it well. And I hope that the success of our work in this area spreads in the world, not just in the U.S., but in the world.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair, now recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I know, although we're here to talk on a specific topic, it seems that the hearing is turned towards net neutrality as well. And as we talk about the basic structure associated with the United States and the FCC, making sure that they are inserting themselves into this conversation, I think blends to what we're talking about today, keeping things open, making sure that everyone can access that, and I appreciate this from our staff as well, Mr. Chairman, on the minority side. Open internet rules are not government regulation of the internet. Net neutrality is about ensuring that the broadband service providers that control the on-ramps to the internet don't become the gatekeepers with the power to favor their own content, throttle some applications, or block consumers' access to information. And I think that's an example to the rest of the world as we talk about this, not a hindrance to the rest of the world. So I hope that we're able to find some agreement there as well. Mr. Chairman, my questions today center a bit around the affirmation of commitments, to talk a little bit about that. But I think that, I agree with some of my colleagues on this committee that we need to send a strong message to the world that the internet has thrived under a decentralized, bottom-up, multi-stakeholder governance model, and that we should all commit ourselves to the free market, multi-stakeholder internet governance model that has worked so well in the past. And those are quotes from 2012 and 2013 by one of my colleagues as well. And I wholeheartedly agree with her and hope that we can find a way to work together in this area as well. But in the area with the affirmation of commitments, specifically from a response from NTIA, that the affirmation is an agreement that includes multi-stakeholder oversight mechanisms to address accountability, transparency, and ICANN's decision-making, the security, stability, and resiliency of the internet DNS, as well as promote competition, consumer trust, and consumer choice. How do you envision the affirmation of commitments will function after the management of the DNS is completely privatized?
So we haven't, in our announcement, done anything to suggest it need to change at all. We recognize, though, that as the community starts to address the questions of ICANN accountability, that the matters covered in the affirmation, which you just summarized, may well come into that discussion, and we certainly have no problem with that being the case. In the meantime, we will continue to press for increased accountability and transparency, although I will say, from my own experience of having served on 2 of the accountability and transparency review teams, the 2 that have happened so far, ICANN is about the most accountable and transparent organization I've dealt with. That's not to say it can't be improved, and indeed, out of the last team, we presented, I think, more than a dozen recommendations of additional steps ICANN can take, and that will always be the case. We'll always be able to find things they can do to improve. But the progress that they've made over the last 4 years in this area has been quite substantive and was part of the factors leading us to make the announcement we made 2 weeks ago that it was now time to proceed with the final phase of the privatization.
And I would just add that I hope that the affirmation of commitments becomes and will always be a staple associated with the transition as well as the permanency associated with this conversation. And another question that I have is, what is VeriSign's role and responsibility? I know that when we go to websites, you see the VeriSign sign there, and it's to encourage trust to individuals. But what exactly does that VeriSign mean?
So VeriSign's, a large company involved in a number of different places in the internet. So, for example, most people know them through their they're the registry for .com, which is the largest of the top-level domain names. With respect to the IANA functions, The specific role they perform is that after ICANN, through its policymaking process, sends to us a change for the root zone file, we verify its accuracy. We pass it on to VeriSign, who actually performs the updating of the 13 authoritative root zone servers with that information. So that's the specific role they play with respect to IANA.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, as my time runs out, I think what that translates to is VeriSign is saying that this website is coming from where it says that it's coming from. But I hope that the committee would entertain a conversation down the road with trust, with best practices that we as consumers can also use down the road, which is not a topic for today, but one I think that we can explore to help consumers down the road to make sure that when they're seeing information, they know exactly what it means, as opposed to seeing VeriSign, as some constituents have reached out to me and said they completely trust the content and those that are behind what is being moved, as opposed to the DNS being tied to or the IP protocol where it's coming from. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the hearing today.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for your input. I think that's a very good point. We'll go now to the former chairman of the committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me say to Mr. Chahati, we rarely have testimony that's inspirational, but yours was. I mean, I wish we had a copy of that to show school children what America's all about. That really was moving to me. So I'll ask you the first question. Have you ever heard of the phrase, if it's not broke, don't fix it? Well, when I was listening to you, and I'm at this point neutral but suspicious of this proposal, it dawned on me, everything you said I agree with. If it's working, what's so wrong with the current system that we want to change it?
Thank you, Congressman. I do believe that there is a confusion as to what NTIA has announced. What is working will not change. ICANN's work to administer these functions is already with us, has been with us, and we've managed it well for 15 years. That's not about to change. And I think the stability of that is important. It sends the right message to the world. What is changing is the accountability mechanisms, really the stewardship that the U.S. government has kept over our activity. Today, that is shared between the U.S. government and our community. In fact, it's not just the U.S. government that ensures we do what we say we need to do. We go through reviews with the engineers at the IETF who meet me every quarter, check on my performance. So there are other mechanisms already in place to make sure we do what we do. The role that the U.S. played progressively became smaller over the years and has now become largely symbolic. By letting the multi-stakeholder model take that role and strengthen our existing mechanisms to make sure we're accountable, we're sending a message to the world that we trust the multi-stakeholder model. They need to hear that. And today, more than ever, we need the world to hear that because other issues of internet governance are coming up in the world. We want them to look at ICANN and say, this is working, and the multi-stakeholder model works.
It's a little bit of a stretch, but, after World War II, we put U.S. troops in Japan, we put U.S. troops in Germany. 70 years later, 60 years later, the world has changed, but we still have some U.S. troops in Germany and some U.S. troops in Japan. The Internet got started in the United States, and to the credit of lots of people, we've tried to decentralize and have the government step back and assume more of a ministerial or just a kind of an oversight role. But what gives the world community faith in the Internet is that they know they have the full faith and credit of the U.S. government behind it. And our ideals, as established in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, are for openness and transparency. If ICANN were to decide to move its headquarters to North Korea, that might not hold true. So, you know, I read your little booklet here, which is very informational. You give the Department of Defense a run for the money on acronyms, I'll tell you that. But, you know, what people like me, I'm a market guy, I'm a free market guy. And I can intellectually understand what you're attempting to do, but there's just at the back of my mind, there's that, you know, there's that old Reagan phrase, trust but verify.
Yes.
And that's what we don't want to give up. I have no problem with this multi-stakeholder community, and I looked at all your organizations and all that. But people like me are a little bit afraid that if NTIA steps back and we just get, so there's not that real kind of FDIC guarantee, so to speak, to use a banking analogy, that the next government that might want to try to do something, the Chinese, the Russians, who knows, they might not take the same attitude as the U.S. government. That's what people like me are concerned about. And my last question, and my time's expired, is there any country that's not a part of ICANN?
Yes, we have 133 countries represented now, although the attendance beyond government representatives is now covering almost all countries in the world. And I want to say, if I could, Mr. Barton, that I actually 100% agree with you that we must have the right belts and suspenders on the proposal we give back to the U.S. government. And frankly, if it doesn't, I'll be the first one to not submit that proposal.
Well, that's my concern. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy, and I yield back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Barton. Thank you, Mr. Shahadi. We'll now turn to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, for 5 minutes. No, you already went? I'm sorry. Then we'll go to, then I'd be delighted to go to Ms. Eshu.
Maybe we should note that it's a first. We're ranking member. The last shall be first. How's that? That's a great quote from Scripture. Well, I want to thank each one of you because I think that this is a really one of the best panels we've had before the subcommittee. Each one of you has been outstanding. You are rooted in very broad and deep experience, and we're very grateful to you. And Mr. Shahadi, I think that you make the case this morning in such a elegant and eloquent way that immigration is the lifeblood of our nation. You wouldn't be before us if that were not the case. And I wouldn't be here as a first generation, none of us would, if that wasn't one of the great, great values of our country. So thank you to each one of you for your testimony. It seems to me that we are all saying the same thing, except there's kind of a hairball in this thing. I would think that multi-stakeholder, all the companies and corporations, the private sector that have weighed in on a multi-stakeholder model would be so embraced by every single colleague here. But we have a fear of moving away from U.S. government perceived control to the control of some bad actor countries. Now, that's a huge leapfrog when we go from NTIA to North Korea. But really, that's what the fear is on this side of the aisle. What I'm concerned about is that, and Ambassador Gross underscored this, is that everything we say, everything we do is being measured, especially by the countries that do not agree with our principles, our democratic principles that are built into the internet. So can someone give the assurance to this notion that regardless of how the Congress voted 413 to zip, with all of the principles that were in it, that somehow we are weakening the path forward, and that the bad guys, the bad actors in the world, will be able to snatch this away from us and do to the internet what they do to their own people. Because I really think that's the central question that's here. Because that's the fear. And fear is, if you list human emotions, it's the top one. So who would like to go at that and perhaps develop some comfort level here with my colleagues?
So I'll start, but I think this is a good question for everyone on the panel. So first off, I understand the concern, but it's not going to happen. Partly because one of our key conditions is we will not accept a proposal that turns this over to a government-led or intergovernmental organization. So it's off the table. Frankly, I'm not sure we needed to say that, because I don't think there was ever any prospect we were going to get a proposal like that. The multi-stakeholder community, again, formed by civil society organizations and large, small, medium-sized corporations, would never have brought a proposal like that back to us. I am not sure what people see as the possible mechanism by which an authoritarian regime would seize control of the domain name system. I think it's an unlikely thing to occur, but one way to prevent it from ever occurring is to make sure we have strong multi-stakeholder groups in countries such as in the developing world who would have to be part of any process to try to
I just want to
move
interrupt
to UN
you. You know
control.
what happens around here, though, is that someone or a group make a statement, and then it becomes a fact. And more than anything else, I think that's what has happened. And there are some outside of this institution that, well, I'm not going to go there because it's not worth it. But I would just like both Mr. Chahadi and Ambassador Gross to go at this. I only have 19 seconds, and I'd also like to ask that a unanimous consent to place in the record statements of support from really the father of the internet, Vint Cerf, the former FCC Commissioner McDowell, the Internet Association, Cisco, and a letter from 6 NGOs. So with what I have, well, I have...
Without objection.
Thank you.
Well, I'll simply say that to Mr. Strickling, if he had not put that condition, I would have made sure it's put. So this is an important condition, and I understand Mr. Strickling's comment that it wouldn't have happened. But it's good for the world to understand this is impossible to happen. It will not happen. And I believe we will come back with a proposal that allays all these fears.
Thank you.
And the only thing I can add is we have a commitment from people to my right that no proposal that will allow that will go forward. We have a commitment from the U.S. government that no such proposal could be accepted. And on behalf of our constituents, we will be watching.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Just an outstanding panel.
Thank gentlelady for her comments, and now we'll go to Mr. Shimkus from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strickland, as you know, I introduced the .com Act last week with several of my colleagues as co-sponsors. Is NTIA opposed to the Government Accountability Office providing to Congress prior to a transition of IANA functions? Are you opposed to a Government Accountability Office review to ensure what you have testified today is true?
Well, Congressman, as I understand it, you can request a GAO study.
My question is, do you oppose us asking for a Government Accountability Office review to ensure your testimony today that we have comfort in that?
I see. It doesn't really matter what I think. You
No,
request that study.
you're here. Do you oppose, or do you say it's not a big deal? Go ahead.
I'm in favor of full discussion of these issues.
So
I'm happy to talk to you.
So you agree?
members.
So you support a Government Accountability Office review? It could be helpful.
I neither support nor oppose it. I'm simply telling you.
I
this
wish
is an
Mr.
important
Dingle was
matter to
here.
discuss.
If Mr. Dingle, yes or no, would you support a Government Accountability review of this transition?
Again, I have no problem full airing and discussion of these issues.
So I guess I'm going to take that as a yes. Mr. Chahadi?
I do not have a view on a particular government.
You all have made
policy.
great promises.
Having said that, I will commit to you, as I did yesterday, that everything we were asked to do, we will do in full transparency to you and to the world.
So a
Without
Government
question.
Accountability Office review of this proposal should not be a challenge or at risk to you?
I think reviews by anyone, and there will be many around the world, of our accountability in that process.
So I guess I can
make the
assume that
process
as,
stronger.
as a yes.
Again, I do not, as I told you yesterday, ICANN is a global organization.
But the-
and we
but
have
the
to be-
gentleman-
No, I only got 2 minutes. I've got like 3 questions, and if I have time, I'd be happy to. Secretary Groves.
I'd like to associate myself with the prior comments, but I will say that more information is better. The process should be open, should be transparent. More information is always helpful.
And we understand the GAO is the Government Accountability Office. It's our arm. It's nonpartisan. It looks, it evaluates to ensure that things that we're concerned with, we have another look, which is what you all are saying. I'm actually kind of shocked at the frustration of this, because I think it would help bring more education, more transparency, and maybe resolve some of the fear. Ambassador Gross, what is to prevent a multi-stakeholder model from then choosing to transition to a government-led ITU model of internet governance?
I think you've gone to the very core of what will be required of any proposal going forward. The problem we all have, and I include myself in this, is that at the moment we are at the beginning of a process. To answer your question, your important question, we have to know the answer at the end. We don't know that. The question now becomes one for the community, the internet community, to come up with a creative, important, and belt and suspenders answer so that the question you ask is fully answered.
And don't you think we have a right to ask these questions?
I think undoubtedly so.
And the government to do the investigation to find out some of these answers?
I think that it's completely up to all
Thank
of you to be able to figure out what your comfort level is.
Thank you. Mr. Shahadi, I've been involved in Eastern European issues my whole career up here. What is the current internet country code for the Crimea region of Ukraine? Is it .ru or is it .ua?
Again, we follow what the UN, in terms of country codes, we follow the UN coding. So even when South Sudan was created, we had to wait for the UN to issue the actual code, and then that's when we...
So you don't know right now of any plans to change that?
No.
Thank you. I'm going to end there. I just want to highlight to my friends here on both sides, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We take that seriously. I don't pledge to some international organizations or governments. Due diligence by the legislative branch of this government is not harmful to this process. In fact, I would argue that it could be very, very helpful, and I appreciate your testimony in support of that, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I think everyone has the same theme and, in a way, kind of asking the same questions. But I want to use a different terminology, at least. We talk about you won't accept, Mr. Strickland, the proposal, and you wouldn't accept, as the CEO, the proposal. I think a lot of our, not distrust, but questions are what happens after the proposal is accepted. I think all of us in this room have probably experienced some bait and switch at some point in time, whether it was a meaningful fraud or things just, okay, you have this new governance and it develops its own personality, and over time they expand their abilities and what they can cover or what they determine provides certainty within the system. And so I want to ask the whole panel, what happens when a scenario occurs where they start expanding the power, for example, saying, geez, if that website's going to use too much bandwidth, where you have to put up so much money, or there has to be some conditions tied to that. How do we prevent that from occurring and the new stakeholder group accepting that when there's no NTIA to verify, hey, that's not within your jurisdiction? Because it sounds like once they develop the new governing body of ICANN, that there's no more check left. And frankly, and we've heard it, we don't trust Russia or China when they're sitting on there, or Iran, or now Turkey, to make policy decisions. And I know we're only talking about domain names, but they can sit there and say, this is tied to a domain name because we're not going to issue you a domain name or a root because. Mr. Strickland.
Well, again, I think that misapprehends what we do today. The policy making in ICANN today is performed by the multi-stakeholder community. The United States participates in that process, not through the IANA functions contract, but through our participation in the Governmental Advisory Committee. That's not changing. We're not going away. As I said in my opening statement, we will remain vigorous advocates for a free and open internet through the Government Advisory Committee, and we'll be joined in that by a number of other like-minded governments participating in that. So,
all right, help me work through that, because that's somewhat confusing to me. So now today, as I understand, like if France on a root file, ICANN approves it, but then it comes to you for just the double-check verification.
in terms of
There's
our-
no
yes.
entity, once the proposal is accepted, there's no entity then other than just the ICANN board. So if they make a mistake, there's no one there to verify it now. Is that a correct?
Well, our role
understanding?
doesn't even necessarily look back at the board process. What we look at is kind of the technical accuracy, and it's kind of a checklist to make sure that what's being sent through followed all the appropriate procedures to come through, and we verify its accuracy. So to the extent that, first off, the policies probably aren't going to be as specific as your example in terms of some specific requests.
But we
from
don't
France.
know. We don't know that.
Well, but it would still be based on the overall policy for top-level domains established by the constituency organizations within ICANN. So if your example is dealing with .fr, the country code, that's one supporting organization at ICANN. If France, the government, is dealing with generic top-level domain, that goes to a separate supporting organization. So that's where the policy making is done. And in those sessions, you have the people who are involved in those different communities participating and answering those questions. So that today happens through a multi-stakeholder process. And then the Governmental Advisory Committee sits separately to resolve public policy issues that may emerge out of the policy making that is happening in these other organizations. And it's there that through consensus policies, the governments can speak to particular issues.
Anyone else? Dr.
Well, I could add, Congressman, that as part of our proposal back to NTIA, our community is going to be very alert to put these belts and suspenders in that proposal to avert the potential down the line of things going awry. We don't know what this will look like. As Ambassador Gross said, we need to get the community involved in designing that process. But you heard today mentioned by one of the panelists on a panel coming up that there are ideas for testing various models to test this. I am sure our community that doesn't let me change the brand of coffee in my cafeteria, I have thousands of people watching everything we do, will be on top of that. And we'll make sure that the proposal comes back with the right guarantees as best we can that this thing does not go the wrong way.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back balance of his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you having this hearing. Appreciate our panelists for being here as well. This is an issue that I know a lot of us are real concerned about as we look at all the questions and potential ramifications that are involved in NTIU making any kind of changes to this, to the ICANN process and the multi-stakeholder process that works so well. I've been a strong component, a strong supporter of a open and free internet, and especially free from governments that have an interest in taxing, restricting, censoring the internet and the ability of its people to use it, and all the power that people have been empowered with to do the things that they've done because of it. So I know I support Congressman Shimkus's bill that he's going to be bringing forward, the .com Act, that puts some of those belts and suspenders that you're talking about in place to slow this thing down and say, let's get a real clear picture of what we're looking at, because there are a lot of unanswered questions when we look at the ramifications of this. I don't find it often where I can quote the Heritage Foundation and Bill Clinton in the same sentence, both in support of the same thing. But just last week, I think you may have heard Bill Clinton express concerns about this, as did the Heritage Foundation and even the Washington Post. And the concern was that giving up ICANN could open the door, quote, open the door to nations that don't value an open and free internet. And just to go one step further, this is an actual quote from former President Clinton. A lot of people have been trying to take this authority away from the U.S. for the sole purpose of cracking down on internet freedom and limiting it and having government protect their backsides instead of empowering their people. These are serious concerns being raised by, again, people that don't always see eye to eye, but share a lot of the concerns that I and many of our colleagues have expressed. So first, I'd like each of the panelists to just real briefly, if you can, touch on those concerns that are being expressed by people that aren't always on the same page. I guess we'll start with you, Mr. Strickland.
So I'll refer back to my statement at the opening, which is we won't let that happen, number one.
What's an assurance of that? I mean, it's good to say we won't let that happen. That's nice to hear it, but nobody knows what's going to happen. You can't tell me what's going to happen.
Well, but
how do you know you won't let it happen?
I'm saying that we will not accept a proposal that has that as its outcome. Period. End of story. So it won't happen. Secondly, no one has yet explained to me the mechanism by which any of these individual governments could somehow seize control over the internet as a whole.
You really don't think that Russia, look, Russia and China have made it very clear what they want to do to suppress internet freedom. They made it very clear.
And they do it within their own country.
And you don't think that they're going to be working, whatever rules you come up with, at the end of the day, y'all would come up with some sort of process if you're going to transfer away. And I say if, capital I, capital F, if you transfer it away, because you will come up with some sort of process. Do you really not think that Vladimir Putin, with all the other things he's busy with right now, isn't going to try to figure out some way to get control? It won't be through the Russian government directly necessarily, but China and Russia proven very resourceful at trying to figure out what that process is so that they can manipulate it. Now, you can do all the things you want to stop that from happening, but if at the end of the day it comes out to where those countries have figured out a way, like they've figured out a lot of other ways too, to do something subversive that goes against all of the intentions that we have, you can't stop that.
Well, Congressman, what is it that you think they could do that they can't do today?
What do you really think? Look at what Putin's doing right now. I know the president just doesn't seem to take this seriously, what he's doing through Eastern Europe. I mean, he's trying to rebuild, get the old band back together, get the Soviet Union back together right now. Before our very eye, I mean, Secretary of State Kerry says, oh, the international community won't accept this. They're doing it. They don't care about what the international community thinks. They're talking about they're invading a country. So, I mean, what would they do to get control of the internet if you threw something out there? Again, I mean, these are real concerns that are being expressed. If the other two panelists can touch on this as well.
Thank you, Congressman. Let me be clear that at ICANN, it is impossible for them today to do so. They've been trying for 15 years.
Which is why it's working.
But it's not because the U.S. actually has the current stewardship role. It's because of the multi-stakeholder model. It stops them. Now, where they will try to do what you're suggesting is in the international intergovernmental organizations. Yeah. They've been trying to do that there. So we want to take away from them any argument that they still go to the UN and try to take over what ICANN does by making sure ICANN is free of one government control, to show them that ICANN believes in the multi-stakeholder model, and this great country that created that model trusts it.
Thanks. And Mr. Gross, real quick, because I know I'm almost out of time. Administration's right now getting ready to participate in the 2014 Internet Governance Forum in Istanbul, Turkey, a country that, as we speak, is blocking its citizens from access to Twitter. Why are we even participating in a sham like this?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the Internet Governance Forum is a non-decision-making, multi-stakeholder process. It has no authority to do anything.
Why would we validate? Why would we validate the things that they're doing that I would hope the administration is opposed to by attending that conference?
I would take a different approach. I would recommend taking a different approach, is that those who believe in the free flow of information ought to attend and speak loudly about the importance of free flow of information. It is the people of Turkey, among other places, that need to hear it and feel supported, not ignored. So it seems to me it's an opportunity for us to be strong in our beliefs there and not shy away from it.
I'd appreciate if y'all look at the legislation that Mr. Shimkus is bringing forward, because I think it does go back to putting those protections in place that we all ought to be concerned about with people that don't have good intentions, that will try to figure out how to get around this. So I thank you, thank the panelists, thank you, Mr. Chairman.